Lieutenant Commander Cat had survived 3 tours in the Middle East, 17 classified missions, and countless nights when the margin between life and death came down to a single heartbeat. But nothing in her Navy SEAL training had prepared her for the look of disgust on Sheriff Dale Hutchinson's face when she walked into the Pine Ridge, Georgia police station on a humid Tuesday morning in July. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The deputy at the front desk didn't look up from his computer screen. Kat placed her driver's license on the counter. "I'm here to report a break-in at my mother's house on Maple Street. Someone forced the back door last night while we were at the hospital." The deputy glanced at the ID, then at her, his expression shifting from boredom to something harder to read. "You're Helen's daughter, the one who's been away." "I've been serving my country, if that's what you mean." Kat kept her voice level, professional. She'd learned long ago that the best response to skepticism was calm competence. "Right," the deputy leaned back in his chair. "And now you're back home, staying in that house. Must be convenient with your mom in the state she's in." Kat felt her jaw tighten. Her mother had suffered a severe stroke 2 weeks ago, which was why Kat had taken emergency leave and returned to the small Georgia town she'd left 12 years earlier. "My mother is in intensive care. Someone broke into her home and went through her belongings. I need to file a report." "Sheriff Hutchinson handles all the cases on Maple Street." The deputy stood slowly, deliberately taking his time. "Let me see if he's available." She waited 20 minutes in the lobby, watching officers come and go, some glancing at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. Pine Ridge was a town of 1,500 people, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where a woman who'd left to become a Navy SEAL was viewed with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. Sheriff Hutchinson finally emerged from his office, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss, sorry for your wait. Why don't you come on back?" His office smelled of coffee and old paper. Photos covered the walls, Hutchinson shaking hands with the mayor, Hutchinson at the Veterans Day parade, Hutchinson presenting awards at the high school. In every picture he stood at the center, the town's protector and authority. "Now then," he settled into his chair, making no move to take notes. "You say someone broke into Helen's place." The back door was open. They went through her bedroom, her office. Nothing obvious was taken, but papers were scattered everywhere. "And you were where when this happened?" "At Regional Medical Center. I've been there every night since my mother was admitted." Hutchinson nodded slowly, his fingers drumming on the desk. "That's interesting, because I've had 3 calls this week from concerned citizens about activity at that house. Lights on at odd hours, strange noises. Someone saw a figure moving around inside at 2 in the morning." "That was me," Kat said. "I've been organizing my mother's paperwork, trying to understand her financial situation." "At 2 in the morning?" "I don't sleep much, Sheriff. Occupational habit." Something flickered in Hutchinson's eyes, a cold amusement. "I'm sure you've picked up all sorts of habits. The thing is, miss, your mother's house is valuable property. Prime location, right in the heart of town. And Helen, well, she's not getting any younger. Even before the stroke, her mind wasn't what it used to be." Kat felt ice forming in her chest. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying that if someone were looking to take advantage of an elderly woman's condition, to maybe get their hands on her estate, well, that would be a serious concern for law enforcement." "You think I broke into my own mother's house?" "I think you've been gone a long time. I think you show up right when your mother has a medical crisis. I think you're staying in her house, going through her things." Hutchinson leaned forward. "I also think the military's been lowering its standards lately, letting in people who maybe don't have the right character." Kat stood slowly, her hands steady despite the rage building inside her. "I came here to report a crime. Instead, you're accusing me of elder abuse." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything, yet." Hutchinson stood as well, his hand resting casually near his service weapon. "But I'll be keeping a close eye on that house. And on you. This is a decent town and we protect our own here. My mother is your own. She's lived here for 40 years. And you left 12 years ago to go play soldier." The pretense of civility dropped from his voice. "Don't come back here expecting a hero's welcome, miss. We take care of our veterans, our real veterans. The men who actually saw combat, not women who got through some watered-down training program on a quota system." Kat walked out of the police station into the brilliant Georgia sunshine, her hands shaking with suppressed fury. She'd faced enemy combatants, survived firefights, led her team through situations that would have broken most people. But this casual dismissal, this small-town corruption wrapped in politeness, was a different kind of battle. Her phone rang as she reached her mother's car. "The hospital." "Miss, this is Nurse Kelly from ICU. Your mother is awake. She's asking for you." Kat drove to Regional Medical Center with her mind racing. She'd been home for 2 weeks, and already she could feel the walls closing in. The whispers when she walked down Main Street. The way old classmates crossed to the other side of the road. The coldness from people who'd once known her as Helen's smart, ambitious daughter. Her mother looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. But her eyes were clear when Kat entered, and her right hand reached out weakly. "Baby." Her mother's voice was slurred from the stroke, but the word was unmistakable. "I'm here, Mom." Kat took her hand gently. "Papers," Helen struggled to form words. "My desk, important." "It's okay. Don't strain yourself. I found your papers. The house was broken into, but I'm handling it." Helen's eyes widened with sudden fear. "No, not safe. Dale, he wants." "Sheriff Hutchinson, what about him?" But her mother's energy was fatting. The nurse appeared at the door, giving Kat an apologetic look. "She needs to rest now. The doctor said 20 minutes maximum." Kat squeezed her mother's hand. "I'll figure this out, I promise." Walking back to the parking lot, Kat felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Her mother was afraid of the sheriff. The break-in hadn't been random, and Kat was being painted as the villain in her own. She'd spent years learning to trust her instincts, to read danger before it struck. Every sense she'd honed told her that something was very wrong in Pine Ridge. Her mother's stroke, the break-in, Hutchinson's hostility, they were connected somehow. Kat sat in her mother's old sedan, thinking. In her years as a SEAL, she'd learned that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who came at you with guns blazing. They were the ones who smiled while they destroyed you, who used the system as their weapon, who counted on their victims being too confused or frightened to fight back. But Sheriff Dale Hutchinson had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that because Kat was a woman, because she was alone, because she was on his territory, she would be easy to intimidate. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Kat spent the next 3 days piecing together a puzzle she hadn't known existed. In her mother's cluttered home office, she found boxes of documents dating back 20 years, property records, tax assessments, correspondence with the county. What emerged was a picture of systematic pressure on elderly homeowners in Pine Ridge's historic downtown. Her mother's house sat on 2 acres of prime real estate, one of the last undeveloped lots on Maple Street. For the past decade, someone had been buying up surrounding properties, always through different shell companies, always at prices well below market value. The sellers were always elderly, always alone, and always seemed to sell shortly after some personal crisis, a medical emergency, a death in the family, a sudden financial hardship. Kat cross-referenced the property transfers with public records at the courthouse. She drove to nearby towns to talk to people who'd moved away from Pine Ridge. And slowly, a pattern emerged that made her blood run cold. Sheriff Dale Hutchinson's brother-in-law owned a development company called Georgia Heritage Properties. On paper, had no connection to the shell companies buying Pine Ridge properties. But Kat had spent years tracking terrorist financing networks. She knew how to follow money through layers of corporate obfuscation. Every shell company led back to, and every property purchase had occurred while the seller was dealing with a crisis that always seemed to involve Pine Ridge law enforcement in some way. Mrs. House sold 2 weeks after her son was arrested for drug possession, drugs that were later proven to be planted. Mr.'s property transferred ownership, while he was in jail on assault charges that were mysteriously dropped after the sale went through. The Wilson family's land sold after their daughter was involved in a suspicious car accident that left her hospitalized for months. Her mother's papers included letters from Helen to the state attorney general, requesting an investigation into the property transfers. The last letter was dated 2 days before her stroke. Kat sat at her mother's desk as the sun set, understanding finally settling over her like a heavy cloak. Her mother hadn't had a random stroke. She'd been getting too close to exposing a corruption scheme that had been running for years, enriching Hutchinson, and while elderly residents lost their homes and their legacies. The question was what to do about it. She could take everything to the FBI, but that would take time. Time her mother might not have, time during which Hutchinson could destroy evidence or manufacture charges against Kat herself. She needed leverage, something immediate and undeniable. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Leave town. Final warning." Kat smiled without humor. Threats were information. They told you that your enemy was worried, that you were getting close to something important. In the SEALs, they'd taught her to run toward the sound of gunfire, not away from it. The next morning, she drove to the county assessor's office in the next county over, where she filed a formal complaint about the property transfers. She visited a lawyer in Atlanta who specialized in elder abuse cases. She made copies of everything and sent them to 3 different people with instructions to release them if anything happened to her or her mother. Then she went back to Pine Ridge and waited. Hutchinson came for her on Thursday evening. Kat was in her mother's kitchen making dinner when she heard the cars pull up outside, 3 police vehicles, lights flashing but no sirens. She watched through the window as 6 officers emerged, Hutchinson among them. She opened the door before they could knock. Hutchinson's voice was formal, almost pleased. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial exploitation of an elderly person and attempted theft by deception." "On whose complaint?" "Acting as temporary conservator for your mother's estate. He has evidence that you've been transferring funds from her accounts without authorization." Kat felt admiration despite herself. It was a smart move. Use the system to neutralize the threat, make the victim look like the criminal. If she were arrested, Hutchinson could search the house legally, seize all her mother's documents, and destroy the evidence of his crimes. "I'd like to see the warrant." Hutchinson held out the paper. Kat scanned it quickly, noting the judge's signature, another local official, probably in on the scheme. The warrant authorized not just her arrest but a complete search of the premises. "I understand," she said calmly. "Am I allowed to lock up the house?" "We'll secure it. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Kat letting the deputy handcuff her. She'd been in worse situations. Much worse. The key was to stay calm, to think clearly, to wait for the right moment. At the station, they put her in an interrogation room and left her alone for 2 hours, a classic intimidation tactic. Kat used the time to meditate, to center herself, to review her options. She'd prepared for this possibility. The question was whether her preparations would be enough. Hutchinson finally entered with Deputy Frank Carson, a younger man who looked uncomfortable. They sat across from her, a folder between them. "You want to tell us about these bank transfers?" Hutchinson opened the folder, showing her printed statements with highlighted transactions. Kat looked at them carefully. Someone had indeed transferred money from her mother's accounts. $10,000 over the past 2 weeks moved to an account in Kat's name. I didn't make those transfers. The account is in your name. The transactions originated from your mother's computer using her passwords, which you had access to. Someone's framing me. Hutchinson laughed. Of course they are. You know how many criminals say that. You're looking at 5 to 10 years, miss, unless you want to cooperate. Cooperate how? Sign over power of attorney to. Let him handle your mother's estate properly. Leave town and don't come back. Do that and maybe these charges disappear. There it was, the real agenda. Get Kat out of the way, take control of her mother's property, add it to the collection. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of scheme that had probably worked dozens of times before. Kat looked at Hutchinson for a long moment. He stared back confidently, a man who'd won this game so many times he couldn't imagine losing. No, she said quietly. Hutchinson's smile faded. You don't seem to understand your situation. I understand it perfectly. You've been running a criminal enterprise for years, using your position to coerce elderly residents into selling their property below market value. You've manufactured crises, planted evidence, and manipulated the legal system. My mother figured it out, so you had her eliminated. I'm guessing a poison that mimics stroke symptoms, easy enough to administer. The room went very quiet. Deputy Carson shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Kat and the sheriff. Hutchinson leaned forward slowly. Those are serious accusations, the kind that could get someone hurt. The kind that are about to go public, Kat said. I've sent copies of my mother's research to the FBI, the state attorney general, and 3 different newspapers. Along with my own investigation, bank records showing the connection between your brother-in-law's company and the shell corporations, and testimony from former residents about how they were coerced. You're bluffing. Am I? You can check my email records. Oh wait, you already did when you hacked into my mother's computer to make those fake transfers, which means you left a digital trail. Hutchinson's face had gone red. You have no proof of anything. I have enough to start an investigation, and once investigators start looking, they'll find the rest. Money trails, witness testimony, inconsistencies in police reports. You've been running this scheme for a long time, Sheriff. That means lots of evidence, lots of people who know pieces of the story. Get her out of here, Hutchinson snapped at Carson. Put her in holding. As Carson led her toward the cells, Kat caught his eye. The deputy was young, maybe 30, and the uncertainty in his expression told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't signed up to be part of a criminal conspiracy. He was just a small-town cop who'd found himself working for a corrupt sheriff. Deputy Carson, she said softly, when this falls apart, and it will, you're going to have a choice. You can go down with Hutchinson, or you can be the one who did the right thing. He didn't respond, but she saw him swallow hard. The holding cell was small and cold. Kat sat on the thin mattress and closed her eyes, running through the next steps. She'd made her move. Now she had to see if it was enough. Around midnight, the power went out. Kat was on her feet instantly, every sense alert. The emergency lights kicked in, casting the cell block in dim red illumination. She heard raised voices from the front of the station, then the sound of the exterior door crashing open. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple people moving fast. Kat pressed herself against the wall beside the cell door, ready for whatever came next. The footsteps stopped at her cell. In the red emergency light, she could make out 3 figures in tactical gear, faces covered. The leader produced a key, opened the cell door with surprising efficiency. Out, a voice commanded, male rough. Kat didn't move. Who are you? One of the figures stepped forward quickly, raising a weapon, and Kat's combat training took over. She twisted inside his guard, used his momentum against him, had him disarmed and on the ground in 3 seconds. The weapon clattered across the floor. The other 2 raised their guns. but Kat already had the first man in front of her as a shield, his own weapon pressed against his temple. "I asked who you are," she said calmly. "We work for," one of the others said. "We're getting you out." "Getting me out or getting me dead?" "Hutchinson wants you gone, doesn't care how. We're supposed to make it look like you escaped and disappeared. You won't be found." Kat's mind raced. This was escalation, Hutchinson moving from manipulation to direct violence, which meant she'd rattled him more than she'd realized, which also meant she was in immediate danger. "Put the guns down," she said. The man laughed. "You're one woman with." Kat moved. She'd spent years training in close-quarters combat, fighting instructors who were bigger and stronger. These were hired thugs, not trained operators. In the confined space of the cell block, size and weapons meant less than skill and speed. She swept the second man's legs, used his falling body to shield herself, kicked the third man's gun hand. The weapon discharged, deafeningly loud in the concrete corridor. She felt the bullet pass inches from her head. Then she was inside his guard, her elbow connecting with his throat, her knee driving into his solar plexus. He went down gasping. The first man tried to grab her from behind. Kat dropped her weight, threw him over her hip, and finished him with a precise strike to the jaw that left him unconscious. The entire fight had lasted maybe 15 seconds. Kat stood in the red emergency light, breathing hard, looking at 3 grown men groaning on the floor. She picked up one of their weapons, a 19 civilian model, checked the magazine, the chamber. Standard ammunition, not police issue. Private contractors, then, had brought in outside help. She heard more movement in the station. Someone was still out there. Kat moved carefully down the corridor, keeping the weapon ready. The main office area was chaos. The power had been cut deliberately, emergency lights casting everything in crimson shadow. And there in the booking area, she found Sheriff Dale Hutchinson. He was holding Deputy Carson at gunpoint. "Stop right there," Hutchinson ordered, his weapon pressed against Carson's head. "Drop the gun or I kill him." Kat assessed the situation instantly. Carson's face was pale, eyes wide. He was unarmed, hands raised. Hutchinson stood behind him, using him as a shield. "You really think you're getting out of this, Dale?" Kat kept her voice conversational. "The FBI is already involved. My lawyer has copies of everything. Killing us just makes it worse. The FBI won't find anything without your testimony, and there won't be any testimony if you're dead. I'll say you attacked me, killed Carson, and I had to stop you. Self-defense. I'm the sheriff. People will believe me." "Will they, after everything comes out about the property scheme?" "Nothing's coming out. Cleaning up right now, destroying documents, wiping computer records. By morning, there won't be any evidence, just your wild accusations against a respected law enforcement officer." Kat saw the calculation in his eyes. Hutchinson had spent years building his position in this community. He wasn't going to give it up without a fight. And he was right about one thing: physical evidence could be destroyed, witnesses intimidated. If she died here tonight, the investigation might die with her. "Put the gun down." Hutchinson's voice was almost gentle now. "You fought well. You're a real soldier, I'll give you that, but this is my town. You can't win here." "He's right," Deputy Carson said suddenly. His voice was shaking, but his eyes met Kat's with surprising steadiness. "You should put it down." And then Carson moved. He threw himself backward, slamming into Hutchinson with all his weight. The sheriff's gun discharged, the bullet going wild. Carson and Hutchinson went down together in a tangle of limbs. Kat was there in an instant, weapon trained on Hutchinson. "Don't move." Hutchinson lay on the floor, breathing hard, his gun knocked away. Carson rolled off him, clutching his shoulder where the gun had grazed him. "You okay?" Kat asked Carson, her weapon never leaving Hutchinson. "I'm fine, just I couldn't let him do it, any of it, not anymore." The front door burst open again. This time, It was people in FBI jackets, weapons drawn, filling the station with shouted commands and bright flashlights. Kat lowered her weapon carefully, placing it on the ground and raising her hands. "Federal agents, I'm Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy. The man on the ground is Sheriff Dale Hutchinson. He just attempted to murder Deputy Frank Carson and myself." What followed was hours of statements, medical examinations, and evidence collection. Kat learned that her lawyer had indeed contacted the FBI, who'd been running their own investigation into corruption in rural Georgia counties. Her mother's research had provided the missing pieces they needed. The power cut hadn't been people. It had been the FBI, using the confusion to get their agents inside. Had been arrested at his home, along with 4 county officials and 3 other local law enforcement officers involved in the scheme. It was dawn before Kat was finally released. She drove straight to the hospital. Her mother was sitting up in bed looking stronger. The doctors had found traces of a rare toxin in her blood, not enough to kill, but enough to cause symptoms that mimicked a severe stroke. With treatment, they expected her to make a full recovery. "Baby," Helen reached for her daughter's hand. "They told me what you did." "I just finished what you started, Mom. You're the one who figured it all out." "I was scared." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Dale came to see me before the stroke. He was so nice, so concerned. He brought me tea. And then—" "I know it's over now." "Is it? What about the house? What about all those people who lost their homes?" Kat smiled. "The FBI is working on that. The property transfers were made under duress. They'll be challenged in court. Assets are being seized. It won't fix everything, but it's a start." Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm sorry I doubted you. When you joined the military, when you became a SEAL, I thought you were running away from us, from Pine Ridge." "Maybe I was," Kat admitted. "But the Navy taught me something important. It taught me that being strong doesn't mean being hard. That protecting people is the highest calling. That sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." "You saved this town," Helen said softly. "No, you did. You had the courage to look at what was happening and say it was wrong. I just had the training to help you finish the fight." Kat stayed with her mother until she fell asleep, then walked out into the Georgia morning. The sun was rising over Pine Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The town looked peaceful, innocent, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Deputy Carson had given a full statement about Hutchinson's activities, earning immunity in exchange for his cooperation. The local newspaper was running a front-page story about the corruption scheme, and Kat's phone was buzzing with messages from former residents wanting to know if they could come home, if they could reclaim what had been taken from them. She stood in the hospital parking lot, watching the town wake up, and thought about what came next. Her leave was almost over. Soon she'd have to return to duty, to the teams, to the life she'd built away from this place. But Pine Ridge was different now. It was a town that had seen the truth, faced its darkness, and chosen to fight back, and that was worth protecting. A text came through from her commanding officer. "Heard about the situation. Take the time you need. That's an order." Kat smiled. The Navy took care of its own. She drove back to her mother's house. Her house, really, now that she thought about it. The place where she'd grown up, where she'd learned to be strong, where she'd eventually learned that strength came in many forms. Inside, she found the box of her mother's research, the documents that had started everything. She sat at the kitchen table, going through them page by page, thinking about all the elderly residents who'd lost their homes, all the families that had been torn apart by Hutchinson's greed. Her phone rang. It was Agent Williams from the FBI. "Commander, I wanted to give you an update. We've arrested and recovered most of the financial records. We're going to need your testimony at trial, but the case is solid." "What about the properties, the people who were forced to sell?" "That's complicated. Some of the sales can be reversed, others will require civil litigation. But we're working with the state attorney general to create a victims fund. It won't make everyone whole, but it's a start. Thank you, Agent Williams. No, Commander, thank you. What you did, standing up to local corruption, risking your own safety to protect your community, that's what we need more of. You're a credit to your uniform. After the call ended, Kat sat in the quiet house, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She'd left Pine Ridge 12 years ago because she wanted to serve something bigger than herself, wanted to prove that she was more than what this small town expected of her. She'd succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, becoming one of the few women to earn the Seal Trident, serving her country with distinction. But in the end, the most important battle hadn't been in some distant war zone. It had been here, in the town where she grew up, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. That evening, Kat visited her mother again. Helen was awake, looking clearer and stronger. "The doctor says I can go home in a few days," Helen said, "if there's still a home to go to." "There is, and I'll be there with you at least for a while." "What about the Navy?" Kat thought about her answer carefully. "The Navy will be there when I'm ready. Right now, Mom, you need me. And maybe I need to be here too. I spent so long trying to prove I was strong enough to be a SEAL. Maybe it's time to prove I'm strong enough to come home." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you, baby. Not because you're a SEAL or a hero, because you're a good person. Because when it mattered most, you stood up for what was right. I learned that from you." 3 months later, Pine Ridge was still healing. Hutchinson and were awaiting trial. 5 properties had been returned to their original owners. The town had elected a new sheriff, Deputy Carson, who'd proven his courage and integrity when it mattered most. Kat had extended her leave, helping her mother recover, testifying in preliminary hearings, and working with the victims' advocacy group that had formed in the wake of the scandal. She stood on the porch of her mother's house one autumn evening, watching the sun set over the town. The maple trees were turning red and gold, and there was a crispness in the air that promised winter. Her phone buzzed, her commanding officer: "Ready to come back yet? We miss you." Kat smiled, typing her response: "Soon, just finishing the mission." Because that's what this was, she realized. Not a detour from her real life, not a distraction from her duty. This was the mission, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, standing up to corruption and abuse, making sure that power was used to serve, not to exploit. She'd learned that in Bud S, in her SEAL training, in every operation she'd ever run. But she'd learned it first here, in Pine Ridge, from a mother who'd had the courage to stand up to a corrupt sheriff, even knowing the risk. Helen appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but steadily. "Dinner's ready." Kat turned to her mother, this woman who'd raised her alone, who'd supported her even when she didn't understand her choices, who'd shown her what real courage looked like. "Coming, Mom." Inside, the house was warm and filled with the smell of home cooking. On the wall were photos: Kat in her dress uniform, Helen at her college graduation, the two of them together through the years. A family, small but strong. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Kat sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, her SEAL team was training, preparing for the next mission. She'd join them soon. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. A car pulled up, Deputy Carson still in uniform. "Evening, Commander. Just doing my rounds. Wanted to make sure everything's okay here." "Everything's fine, Sheriff." Kat smiled at the new title. "How's the job?" "Harder than I thought, easier than I feared." He paused. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to do the right thing, for showing me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones closest to home. You saved my life, Frank, and you saved this town. Don't ever forget that." After he left, Kat sat in the darkness, thinking about courage and duty, about coming home and standing your ground, about the different ways a person could serve. She'd been a Navy SEAL, one of the elite trained to handle the most dangerous missions. But she'd learned something important in Pine Ridge. True strength wasn't just about physical courage or tactical skill. It was about moral courage. It was about standing up when it would be easier to look away. It was about protecting not just your country, but your community, your family, the people who needed you most. Sheriff Dale Hutchinson had pressed a gun to her head, thinking she was just another obstacle to remove, another victim to intimidate. He'd learned the hard way why you never threaten a Navy SEAL. Not because they're trained killers, not because they're physically superior, but because they're people who sworn an oath to protect others, who chosen service over self-interest, who understand that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. Kat stood, stretching, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulder from an old combat injury. Tomorrow she'd call her commanding officer, start planning her return to active duty. But tonight she was home, and that was enough. Inside, her mother slept peacefully, safe in a town that was slowly learning to heal, protected by a daughter who'd traveled the world only to discover that the most important battles are often fought in your own backyard. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, and Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy SEAL, stood guard over her mother's house, over her, over the people who'd once doubted her but now knew the truth. You don't threaten a SEAL and expect to walk away unchanged. You don't corrupt a town and expect it to stay silent forever. And you don't underestimate a woman who's proven herself in the world's most demanding military unit. Pine Ridge had learned its lesson, the hard way, and it was better for it. The end.